Hello, good morning, good afternoon, welcome. I'm very pleased to be joined by Dr. John Massey. John Massey, as most of you know, is probably the world's sort of most frequent hydrogen trainer. He probably trained more people in hydrogen than anyone else in the world, I reckon, by my count, given that we've trained over 4,000 people on World Hydrogen Leaders. So welcome, John. How are you doing?
Good. Hi, Nad. Nice to be here.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't know the numbers, but
a lot of
anyway, if you
people.
say so.
And you obviously do your consultancy as Grey Sales Energy, and we've got four or five courses coming up in the short order on green hydrogen projects, on integrating hydrogen and renewable power, on hydrogen and long duration storage, and on moving and storing hydrogen. So a whole complete array of different parts of, I guess, of the hydrogen value chain, a lot around the production, but also, yeah, as I said, moving it, storing it. So how are you viewing the market, the progression, as we talk now in January 2024? We obviously had quite a lot of activity over the last few years. We're seeing, I guess, for me, key bits of regulation coming in that are going to help allow investments to be made across an array of different areas. And that kind of legislation, that legislative body and regulation is certainly, I guess, going to enable some technology to be deployed
Yeah,
and some innovation to occur. So, yeah, what are your thoughts?
yeah. I mean, I think that last one. I guess 2023. Most people would have looked at 2023, and probably it didn't live up to the kind of hype that was around in 2022 in terms of things actually getting built. But a few things happened last year. In Europe, for example, with green hydrogen, the definition of renewable hydrogen finally got signed off kind of in the middle of the year. Um, we finally, just before Christmas in the US, got the that kind of final suggestion for how they're going to define renewable hydrogen for the tax credits and so on. So, I mean, it's important to, I think, recognize that before those things are in place, it's hard for people to invest because they don't know what market they're investing into. So I think the US one, is it February or March or something, that gets finalized. So once those are in place, investors can finally start to put money on the table and get some projects built. There've been a few other things that have happened as well in terms of policy. In Europe, there's the European Hydrogen Bank. That auction is ongoing, that 800 million euros. Again, I think that's a March or April timeframe by which we should know about contracts being awarded for green hydrogen projects there. The UK, just before Christmas, announced 11 projects, I think it was, that had won subsidy to be built in the UK, added up to only to 150 megawatts. Came out a lot more expensive than people thought it was going to be. In Denmark, there was an auction with some top-up premiums again earlier in 2023. So I think with hydrogen, there's been a kind of danger that obviously there's been lots of hype around it, lots of expectations. I mean, I always tell people it's really kind of just at the start. It's kind of emerging rather than mature. I think there's a tendency, given all the news items and so on, to think about hydrogen as a mature sector. But certainly, if we look at, I mean, existing conventional hydrogen is a mature sector. But if you're looking at particularly green hydrogen, particularly electrolysis, I still have that in kind of relatively emerging in terms of modern, if you like, modern renewables-driven electrolysis. Again, electrolysis as a technology has been around for a while. So I think my expectations looking forwards are, I think this year will be the year when projects actually start to get signed off and built. Again, I think my view is always, what I kind of tend to tell people is, my view is that, again, it's very easy to get sucked up in all the kind of mega projects. They will obviously take longer to get sorted out, but I think smaller projects in the megawatts, tens of megawatts type of range, those are the ones that we should start seeing getting built. And if you look at other technologies in the past, we didn't immediately build gigawatt scale solar farms or gigawatt scale wind farms. We started off with small ones. That starts to drive manufacturing, starts to drive some volume, it starts to drive the economics, and then we can kind of move on to the bigger things. So
Yeah,
I
I mean,
think
it
I'd be
took.
quite,
I think the first gigawatt scale solar was sort of 2016.
Something
Um,
like that. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and you know the feed-in tariffs that sort of kick-started it all were way back in 2005. I think the initial round to start scaling it. So it was a good decade to get to gigawatt for solar and but yeah, you're right. You know these things are going to take time. And I
There's
think
also some big challenges in moving that about and storing that. If you're going to produce huge quantities, you've either got to stick it in a pipe and move it, hopefully not terribly far, in something like a hub. Those will be the places where we get the biggest ones built the soonest, I think. Or you've got to create a supply chain that doesn't currently exist to move it about over long distances. So, and again, I think smaller scale stuff, you can build it close to where, or even on the same site as where it's going to be used, that kind of stuff. So yeah. So on the courses, I talk about obviously talk about the economics of green hydrogen, talk a bit about the technology, but try and kind of place it in the context of what I think is happening in the market or examples in the market and that kind of stuff. So, and yeah, just trying a bit of kind of realism on kind of where we are and how quickly things can move.
yeah. Yeah, I mean it's going to take time, and as you say, the technology isn't necessarily new, but putting it all together is new, and that's kind of real sort of
Hmm.
system integration, and there are engineering challenges around some of those key links, especially around when you start to sort of move it around, even for a short distance pipeline. You know, there's got to be innovation and challenges solved. In terms of, I mean, you mentioned the regulation. We're seeing certainly, I think, from my perspective, regulatory convergence as well. So I think some of the US stuff is following the detail of the European stuff. And is that the same thing that you see happening also with obviously the UK, which isn't part of the EU now, some of those other sort of markets in terms of, I guess, contract for difference mechanisms and some of those other policy pieces?
Yeah, no, I think there are still differences. I mean, even on the regular and the kind of defining what clean hydrogen is, that still differs. The UK's low carbon hydrogen standard is different to the EU's, which will be slightly different to the US. It looks like the US is going to be broadly similar, perhaps even a little bit stricter than the EU when it comes to things like time matching renewables with hydrogen production, those kind of things. It would be nice to think there would be some kind of standardization and globalization in terms of those standards. I don't think that's very realistic anytime soon. There's lots of politics and other lobbying and so on that gets involved in standards. So it's I think where that's the kind of government policy side. I think on the industry standardization side, I think there it would be, I can see more likelihood and it would be in some ways actually more useful to see things standardization around things like it could be things like safety standards and benchmarks and so on. How you measure performance, how you describe performance metrics and so on of electrolyzers and those kind of things. And part of the reason I think we've seen that in other industries. I mean, you and I both come out of the telecom sector in a dim and distant past, and that was a prime example of where standards. You always start with lots of companies with their own kind of proprietary technologies, and obviously they want that to be the biggest market share. And so to begin with, there's always a bit of resistance to everyone agreeing on something. And then what happens over time is that the industry does realise that you actually end up with a bigger industry if people can coalesce around. You don't standardize everything, but you standardize some core parameters over which then companies can value add and differentiate over the top. So I think certainly on some of the technology side, some of the kind of integration of technology side, that kind of thing, I think that's where I can see a bit more focus on trying to agree standardized ways of doing things, how to modularize electrolyzers, that kind of stuff, how to not necessarily what's in the module being standardized, but how you connect modules together, those kind of things. And as I say, that also things like safety and that kind of stuff are going to be quite important. There's some work going on with various groups looking at trying to define kind of best practices and standards for how you approach those kind of issues. So yeah, I can see that happening more on the industry side, probably less. I don't see much in the way of convergence on the kind of policy government side, if you like, because different markets will kind of want to keep their own flavors of doing things, if you like, to suit their own kind of market environment and kind of political objectives as well.
And lobbying. And would that mean some projects are built to, I guess, the lowest common denominator and to give them the flexibility to supply either the markets?
Yeah, so I think so projects, I mean, supplying the markets, I mean, that raises a whole other issue. I think one of the big unknowns still, I think, with hydrogen is who's going to buy it. There's been lots of discussion about cost, obviously, how much it costs to produce. There's lots of models out there. We're starting to see, and the good thing about having these first auctions and actual tenders and competitions coming through from a regulatory side is we actually find out what the prices actually are that projects want. So in the UK, just before Christmas, they came out quite scarily high, for example. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it worked out something like kind of $11 or $12 a kilo or something. It was some very large number, the first of kind, relatively small projects. So I think there's still a whole bunch of questions about how hydrogen will be used, what sectors will it be replacing grey hydrogen in industry? I think there's no doubt we will see growth there. Steel, there seems to be pretty strong growth there as well. But then in other sectors, things like transport, it's still hard to say, I think, at things like the kind of truck level. There are already hydrogen trucks, there will continue to be, but what percentage of the market will that ultimately be? But I've seen a shift, I've seen a lot more focus in the last year on recognizing things like shipping, though, and aviation and so on. There's really very few options in those kind of sectors if you're not going to use not necessarily hydrogen as hydrogen, but something derived from clean hydrogen to run those sectors. And then one that I raised a while ago, and I'm glad to see kind of come up a little bit more again just before Christmas here in the UK, was hydrogen for power, and as a method of storing, a method of actually helping you grow a more electrified system, more renewables into the system. So just before Christmas, I think literally kind of 2 or 3 days before Christmas, there was a whole flurry of documents here in the UK where the government have launched a consultation on a subsidy scheme for I think 2 hydrogen power plants to be built by some sort of end of the decade, I think was the idea, and also a scheme to support the construction, again, I think it was 2 salt cavern storage facilities for hydrogen, recognizing that at the moment there's no kind of market case to build long duration storage and to build those kind of alternatives. But one of the things that came out in that document, for example, was that the UK government also have a competition already running for natural gas with carbon capture as an alternative way of kind of flexible thermal low carbon electricity. But this new document made it clear that they reckon if you're operating at low load factor, low capacity factor, so if you're not running that plant very often, it's just filling the gaps between, in the UK, lots of offshore wind, elsewhere it might be other things. That's not as well suited to having carbon capture. I think carbon capture has to run kind of, it's not well suited to kind of flexing it down very rapidly. Whereas they reckon hydrogen maybe fills that gap.
Yeah.
So you're not running these things all the time. You might only be running them kind of 5%, 10% of the time, in which case, I mean, it's nice to have low cost and high efficiency, but that's not the kind of primary driver. You need something to keep the lights on when you've got a gap in your supply. So that was interesting. Japan and Korea are already for a few years now have been looking at things like ammonia with coal and also hydrogen with natural gas. So I think that's an interesting sector, the kind of power sector, and that's hydrogen not competing against renewables and electrification. In my mind, that's hydrogen actually enabling more renewables and electrification by filling that kind of difficult gap at the end. So yeah, there's sort of some interesting kind of new market movements, but that's obviously not a short-term growth for hydrogen. That's something that's more a long-term bet. I think there's still quite a bit of uncertainty about what the short-term drivers of demand are going to be.
And that's certainly government backed in terms of the activity, and also looking at hydrogen as a strategic asset for the country, and I guess a strategic energy reserve in the same way that there is in the US, and I guess with the geopolitics of our time, and we're seeing potential issues with undersea cables being cut in the Baltic. Countries are going to need to ensure that they have enough energy. Yeah, it's a good point.
So I mean, so all those issues that we talked about, they kind of come up in different places within the courses. So the courses are designed on the platform not to just kind of be a kind of dry summary of what components make an electrolyzer project, or what technologies make up supply chains for moving and storing hydrogen, for example, but to try and on my particular courses, I don't go into kind of vast engineering detail on these things, but I try and let people know enough about those technologies to kind of, they know the terminology, they kind of know what some of the pros and cons are, but also place it in that kind of context that we've been talking about. Where's the demand going to come from? What's going to drive the business case? What are some of the economic challenges? And also, what does it compete with? I think it's crucial in hydrogen that people don't just sort of sit in a hydrogen bubble and think about hydrogen being the solution to all these problems they're looking at. But hydrogen ultimately is going to have to be better, cheaper, or more practical, or more last longer, or whatever it is. It's going to have some advantages over other ways of doing some of these things. So again, I think from a training point of view, I think it's important to for people to know that the kind of training on the platform, there's some other trainers doing some very good kind of more detailed technology stuff. But if the courses that I do in particular are very much that, it's trying to blend that enough technology to kind of make you dangerous, if you like, but in the context of kind of the business case and the market opportunity that's out there, and also the market risk. You don't want to pile a load of money into something without being aware, or at least thinking about what the risks are and what the alternatives might be.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the role of hydrogen, the advantages and disadvantages in terms of obviously the law of thermodynamics, and the advantages, I guess, of being a molecule versus remaining electrons. But yeah, lots of common sense, lots of insight. So yeah, very interesting courses. Thanks a lot, John. Thanks for your summary, and we look forward to seeing this season's courses, as it were. So open the Q1 of 2024. So many thanks. Take care. Stay safe, and we look forward to learning more on World Hydrogen.
Yeah, look forward to meeting a lot of people on them this year, and learning some things myself as well. Thanks, Ned.
Cheers. Take care. Bye bye.